I was pulling into my driveway after a long day of field work when I found my path blocked by a golf cart, not just any golf cart but one decked out with magnetic HOA signs on both sides and a small American flag fluttering from the back. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her late 40s wearing a blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." Clutching a clipboard like it was the nuclear codes, she hopped out before I could even put my truck in park, marching toward me with the determination of someone who had just discovered a new violation to enforce. Her bleached blonde hair bounced with each step and her oversized sunglasses reflected my confused expression. "Finally caught you," she announced triumphantly, tapping her clipboard with a manicured nail. "You owe the Meadowbrook Estates HOA $3,750 in back road maintenance fees plus late penalties." I rolled down my window, trying to keep my expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. I don't live in Meadowbrook Estates." Her laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Nice try, but everyone who uses this road pays their fair share, no exceptions." She thrust the clipboard toward me, revealing a spreadsheet with my address highlighted in aggressive yellow. "You've been freeloading off our road maintenance for 6 months now." That's when I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my federal badge, holding it up just long enough for her to see the eagle emblem clearly. "Ma'am, this road belongs to the US government. I suggest you move your cart." The change in her expression was instantaneous. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, the clipboard dropping slightly in her grip, but I could see the wheels turning behind those sunglasses, already plotting her next move. "Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this situation. 6 months ago, I'd accepted a position as a federal land surveyor with the Bureau of Land Management. The job came with security clearance and responsibility for monitoring several parcels of government property throughout the state. When I found the house on Pine Ridge Drive, it seemed perfect, secluded, quiet, and connected to the main highway by what appeared to be a well-maintained private road. What the real estate agent had mentioned only in passing was that the road ran directly through Meadowbrook Estates, and HOA-controlled neighborhood known for its strict regulations and aggressive enforcement. My property sat a quarter-mile beyond their boundaries, accessible only by this federal easement that predated the subdivision by decades. The house itself was modest, a 3-bedroom ranch that had served as quarters for Forest Service personnel back in the 70s. But Karen Rodriguez, as I would soon learn her name to be, saw only one thing: another resident to control, another source of fees to collect, another person who needed to follow her rules. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after I moved in, printed on official HOA letterhead. It welcomed me to the neighborhood and included a helpful packet of regulations: pool furniture colors approved, mailbox styles acceptable, grass heights measured to the 1/4, and I filed it away, assuming they'd realize their mistake. When I didn't respond, the second letter was less friendly. It noted my failure to pay the initiation fee and monthly dues, adding that late penalties were accruing daily. This one I actually responded to, sending a polite note explaining that my property was not part of their HOA and therefore not subject to their fees or regulations. That's when things escalated. The third communication wasn't a letter, but a bright orange violation notice taped to my mailbox, improper mailbox color, it declared, with a $50 fine payable within 5 business days. Then came complaints about my truck being too large, my driveway needing resealing, and incredibly, my failure to submit architectural plans for the shed that had been standing since 1985. I documented everything, scanning each notice and keeping a detailed log. My training in federal procedures had taught me the value of thorough record keeping. Little did I know how valuable that habit would prove to be. The harassment wasn't limited to paper. Karen began what I can only describe as a campaign of intimidation. She would park her golf cart at the entrance to the federal road, timing how long I was gone and making notes on her ever-present clipboard. When I installed security cameras, she complained they violated HOA rules about surveillance equipment. When I ignored that notice, she retaliated by having the HOA erect a large sign declaring the road private property of Meadowbrook Estates, complete with a list of fines for unauthorized use. That sign lasted exactly 1 day before I had it removed, citing federal statute 18 U.S. 1361, which makes it a crime to willfully injure or commit depredation against property of the United States. I kept the sign as evidence and sent Karen a certified letter explaining the federal government's position on obstructing access to government property. Her response was to double down. She began telling neighbors I was a squatter, someone taking advantage of a legal loophole to avoid paying my fair share. She suggested at home meetings that maybe they should install a gate or hire a security guard to check residency permits. The other board members, she assured everyone, were fully behind her efforts to bring me into compliance. What Karen didn't know was that several of her neighbors had begun reaching out to me privately. Margaret Chen from 2 houses down stopped by with cookies and an apology, explaining that most residents were embarrassed by Karen's behavior but too intimidated to speak up. Robert Patterson, a retired attorney, warned me that Karen had a history of targeting anyone she perceived as challenging her authority. The situation reached a boiling point when Karen decided to make my noncompliance the centerpiece of the quarterly home meeting. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email, not so subtly suggesting that my refusal to pay was why they couldn't afford to repave the community playground. She painted a picture of a selfish outsider taking advantage of hardworking homeowners and promised the issue would be resolved once and for all. At the meeting, I received my invitation through certified mail, a formal summons to appear before the HOA board to address the matter of unpaid fees and violations. The letter threatened legal action, liens, and even criminal trespassing charges if I continued to use their road without paying. It was signed by Karen as HOA president and witnessed by 2 other board members whose signatures looked suspiciously similar. I decided to attend, but not for the reasons Karen expected. I spent the week before the meeting preparing my case, gathering surveys, federal documents, and historical records. I even reached out to my supervisor at the bureau, who found the situation amusing enough to provide additional documentation about the road status and history. The night of the meeting, I arrived to find the community center packed. Karen had done her job well, turning what should have been a routine quarterly meeting into must-see drama. She stood at the podium in a power suit, her clipboard replaced with a leather portfolio, looking every inch the suburban warrior ready for battle. She waited until I was seated before beginning her presentation. With the flair of a courtroom prosecutor, she laid out her case, photos of my truck on there, road time-stamped, and annotated copies of every letter sent, and ignored a detailed accounting of what I allegedly owed, now approaching $5,000 with fines and interest. She even had a PowerPoint presentation complete with animated transitions. The crowd murmured appreciatively at her thoroughness. I could see some nodding along, others looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Karen basked in the attention, building to what she clearly thought would be her triumphant conclusion, and so she said, voice rising with righteous indignation, I move that we authorize immediate legal action against Mr. Thompson for theft of services, trespassing, and willful violation of HOA covenants. All in favor? Before anyone could respond, I stood up. Point of order, I said calmly. I'd like to present some information that might be relevant to this discussion. Karen's smile was predatory. You'll have your chance to speak during the resident comment period at the end of the meeting. Actually, I continued, reaching into my jacket, this concerns federal law, which I believe takes precedence over Robert's rules of order. I pulled out my badge and held it up, making sure everyone could see it clearly. My name is David Thompson, and I'm a senior surveyor with the United States Bureau of Land Management, Western District. The road you've been discussing isn't your private property. It's a federal easement established in 1947 for access to government-managed lands. The room went silent. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on an alarming purple. That's impossible, she sputtered. We've maintained that road for 20 years. I walked to the front of the room, pulling out my phone to project documents onto the screen she'd been using for her presentation. Here's the original survey from 1947, here's the federal registration, and here's the current map showing the easement boundaries. I clicked through each image, slowly letting the official seals and stamps sink in. You'll notice the road extends from Highway 12 directly to my property, which itself is on land leased from the federal government. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. I Heard someone whisper I told you. Something was off about this whole thing. Karen rallied, trying to regain control. Even if that's true, you've been using our amenities, benefiting from our maintenance. Actually, I said, pulling up another document. The Bureau of Land Management has been paying Steinberg Construction for road maintenance since 2018. You might recognize them. They're the same company your HOA uses. We've been splitting the costs 60/40 with the federal government paying the majority. I watched as several board members pulled out their phones, presumably checking the HOA's financial records. Their expressions told me they were finding exactly what I knew they would. The maintenance costs they'd been collecting fees for were already largely covered. Furthermore, I continued, now addressing the crowd directly, attempting to restrict access to federal property is a violation of 18 U.S.C. 1361. Sending fraudulent bills for services not rendered could be considered mail fraud under 18 U.S. 1341, and using HOA funds for purposes other than those stated. Well, that's a matter for state authorities. Karen's co-board members were slowly edging away from her at the front table. One of them, a nervous-looking man in his 60s, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion pending further review. But I wasn't quite finished. There's one more thing. Over the past 6 months, I've documented 37 instances of harassment, including attempted restriction of access to federal property. My supervisor has authorized me to file formal complaints with both federal and state authorities if this behavior continues. The room erupted. Residents demanded to see financial records, questioning where their fees had been going if the government was paying for maintenance. Board members tried to restore order while distancing themselves from Karen's actions, and Karen herself stood frozen at the podium, still clutching her leather portfolio, watching her carefully constructed kingdom crumble. Margaret Chin stood up in the back row. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in our HOA president. The motion was seconded by 3 people simultaneously. When the vote was called, it was unanimous except for Karen's own shaky nay, as the meeting devolved into chaos, with residents demanding forensic accounting and threatening their own legal action. I quietly gathered my materials and headed for the door. Karen intercepted me in the parking lot, her earlier bravado replaced with desperate bargaining. Surely we can work something out, she said, her voice strained. This was all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to do what was best for the community. I stopped and turned to face her. Ma'am, you attempted to extort a federal employee, defrauded your neighbors, and violated multiple federal statutes. My report will be filed Monday morning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigations and revelations. The forensic audit revealed that Karen had been collecting road maintenance fees while the federal government was already paying the majority of costs, pocketing the difference through creative accounting. She'd been doing this for 3 years, amounting to over $40,000 in misappropriated funds. The state attorney general's office filed charges for embezzlement and fraud. The federal prosecutor added charges for attempted extortion of a federal employee and interference with government operations. Her real estate license, which she'd used to give herself an air of authority, was revoked pending investigation. At her arraignment, Karen stood before the judge in the same powers suit she'd worn to that fateful home meeting, though it looked considerably less impressive. Under the harsh courtroom lights, her lawyer entered a plea of not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Emails showing her knowledge of the federal payments, bank records of the diverted funds, and my meticulously documented harassment painted a clear picture of intentional fraud. The judge set bail at $50,000 and ordered her to have no contact with any home members or residents pending trial. As the bailiff read out the potential penalties: 20 years for mail fraud, 10 years for theft of government funds, 5 years for attempted extortion. Karen's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks as the reality of federal prison replaced her dreams of suburban domination.